Hello, this is Chris Goldthorpe, America's after-school enrichment chess teacher, and this is going to be after-school enrichment class number 7. This one is going to be about how to do a checkmate with a rook, which was one of the first basic endgames beginners should learn. Although the checkmate with the queen should be faster and take fewer moves, the one with the rook is less likely to produce an accidental checkmate. So let's dive in right away. First, I'm going to show you the easy way, though it might not take the minimum number of moves, and that is what we call the wiggle method. So let's take a look at the wiggle method. We're going to move the rook only when it is moved closer to the enemy king and closer to the corner and guarded by your king. So at first we want to establish a position where we put our rook between the kings, and then you want to have your rook diagonally next to his king, guarded by your king, and then every time he moves we make his space smaller. So let's see what that looks like in a game situation. So here we have two squares between the kings. It'll take 2 moves to get the rook to either of these and 1 move to get the king closer. So we could start with a move like this. And now the enemy king should try to stay in the center and as far from the nearest edges as possible. So he might make a move like this. Okay, and then with the wiggle method, which is not the same as the optimal method, that is more complicated, you might stay in the center, and now we do here. And now white will do the wiggle method until the king gets checkmated in this corner or right beside it. So at this point, the king is confined to this 5x5 area and cannot cross this line, and must move. And so now we can move our king, and now we can move our king, and now he's got to go backwards or this way. Now if he goes this way, we can move the rook. If he goes this way, you move your king. So if he goes this way, then we move the king. He goes here. We'd like to be able to put the rook here immediately, but we can't. He goes here, and when these are like this, we're going to just make a king move. Now if he moves here, we'd move the king here, but if he goes here, then we move the rook this way. Now, whether he goes here or here or here, any of these three, you're going to make more king moves now. If he moves back now, we'll move here. But if he goes here, then by the wiggle method, I'm very tempted to suggest a different move, which I know is maybe a little faster here, but if we keep using the wiggle method, we'll do this. Okay, and now I'll go here, and if he goes here, there's a faster move than the wiggle method, but just to stay with the wiggle method, we'll go here, he goes here, and I just keep doing this. Now, of course, this takes more moves than an optimal method. However, you need not think very much along the way. And here, if you put the rook here, pause the video and figure out what black's next move would be if white moves the rook here. If white puts the rook here, that would make a stalemate. And it's one of the few stalemate type positions. So we could go here, and then he goes here, and now you have to wait here. And then when he goes back to the corner, then you can do a checkmate. So let's see what that looked like from the beginning. See, we only move the rook one square at a time with this method, and if doing so gives the rook away, then you move the king instead. The rook is only going to move closer and closer to the corner that we intend to eventually checkmate the king in. Okay, and of course you could turn the board in any number of directions and do that in different directions. So this is an easy one to learn, but it does take too many moves. Now let's see what optimal play looks like from that position. Go from here, and we'll just make the quickest checkmating move each time. And we're going to learn in a minute how to use an optimal method. By optimal, I mean you checkmate them in the minimum number of moves. Sometimes there are multiple moves which are equally effective. Once you have the enemy king confined to the edge of the board, then you know you're making progress. Each time here, if black moves backwards, we can checkmate immediately. So, if the classroom is composed of all kids who are very new to chess, you may want to, for now, just teach them the wiggle method, much as I hate to think that way. So, at this point, you may want to end the video and show the rest of this video to your more advanced students later. But this should enable anybody with a king and a rook to get a checkmate against the defending king. Now, when you teach the king and queen against a king, you should make sure that the students recognize that they should not attempt to treat the queen as a rook, because the queen should checkmate in no more than 9 moves, and the rook may take 16 moves to do a checkmate. So, let's go back to the beginning here, and then we're going to look at a system for doing it in the optimal way, that is, in a minimum number of moves or close to it, which, if you really know how to do it in the optimal method, then when more advanced players face each other and somebody is very short of time, which might be the only reason why between 2 experienced players that this person did not just give up. If white is very low on time, white needs to be able to do this checkmate very quickly. If you have a 5-second delay on each move, then you want to do it in a low number of moves anyway. But you should never make perfection the enemy of good. That is, you want to make sure that you do get the checkmate. And if you get the checkmate in less than 50 moves, you have a win in any event. So this more advanced method will be for the players who can implement it. So let's look first at this image. And notice how we have the 4 center squares enclosed. Next to that, we have this 4x4 section of squares. Then finally, we have a 6x6, which only excludes the squares on the edge. That is, the squares on the side or corners. And notice how these long diagonals are shown. That will have significance in our discussion that follows. So, the goal in the more advanced method is whatever area of the board the king is in other words, whichever of these squares is the smallest one that the defending king is in, you would like to force him out of that either with a check or by Zugzwang. Zugzwang, of course, is the situation where the defending king must make a move and has no choice but to move out of the section it's in. So if the king is in the center, you want to force him into this 4x4, to the edge of that. If he's in the edge of this 4x4 section, you want him to move into the edge of this 6x6, and after that you want to move him to the edge of the board. So there's a couple of relative king positions to be concerned with. Here the kings are on the same file. Now this could of course work sideways where they're on the same rank. And in this situation, if you can, you want to give check with the rook far away from the king, but where the line between your rook and his king and between the kings forms a right angle, such that his king is forced to move back. And that should be the king moving back to one of the edges which is closest to him. It wouldn't make as much sense normally to try to get him to go to an edge that's further away, unless that was the only way to force him back. Now, if your rook was on this file or this file, of course, you can't put your rook here or here because the king would take it immediately. So therefore, you could come up to one of these two squares where the king is forced to move back or move to the side, and then you'll get the next position. See, and here it is in a horizontal. Everything we say about this would be the same as the vertical except turned sideways. So here the kings are a knight move away. We are assuming that you know what it means, a knight move away, because by now you should know how the knight moves. So when the enemy king is a knight move away, we want to decide between giving check or putting your rook on the only line that goes between the kings. Now, if they're a knight move away, there will either be a file or a rank between them, but not both. So here we have a rank between them. So you would want to put your rook on that. Now, if your rook was on the G file, putting your rook on the fourth rank wouldn't work because obviously black would just take it for free. In that event, it's normally better to simply make a tempo move, say put the rook here. Then he has to go here, and on the following move you can give check and force him back. Your goal is always to get him closer to the edge. You do not have to foresee each and every single move and plan it all the way to the checkmate. You just want to make the king go to the edge of the board. So, keeping this in mind, whatever group he's in, you want him to go further out toward the edge. Anytime the defending king crosses one of these long diagonals, then he's going to be closer to a different edge than he was before. For instance, if he's here, he's closest to this edge. But if he crosses this square, now he's closest to this edge, and we should act accordingly. Naturally, we want to bring him to the nearest edge, as it may generally take fewer moves. So, to do that, let's look at the final checkmate position. So, if we had a defending king, now the only place that a checkmate or a stalemate is possible when you have a king and a rook only against a king only is with the defending king on the edge. So if the defending king were here and white just did a checkmate and white has a king and a rook, see how many different places are there that it is possible for the white king to be if white's last move was a rook move and he put black in checkmate. You may want to pause the video. It should be obvious to you that this is the only square the white king could be on to make a checkmate. Now, if the king were in the corner, now there are two different possible king positions where a rook on the 8th rank would give checkmate. That would be here or here. And there are two different king positions where a rook on the H file would end up a checkmate. That would be here or here. So we know what we're looking for in the final checkmate. So along the way, like we said, we just want to keep pushing him further from the edge. So this will take some practice. There are two stalemate positions that you should be aware of. So we'll look at one of them right now. Here, if white moves the rook here, and it's black's move, this is a stalemate position that you should recognize. Here's another one that you should recognize. Okay, if white goes here, that creates a stalemate. This type of checkmate could be with the black king in any corner, and this could be turned in different directions. So both of these come up rarely in practice, whereas with a king and a queen against a king, stalemates happen all the time. But we have to bear in mind in both of those, we only need to worry about stalemate when the king is on the edge of the board. And with the rook, those are the only two types of stalemate. So we do need to avoid those. So let's see how we would do it from here. Rook a5 or rook d1 both work equally well. So we saw the other type before. This time we'll go this way. And the defending king just wants to stay as close to the center as possible, and otherwise he wants to make a move that attacks the rook in a way so that the rook must move. If you must move your rook, move it as far away from the king as possible. In the optimal method with a checkmate, we never want to move the rook to a square immediately beside the king, whether it's to give check or to be diagonally adjacent to the defending king. So here's the king trying to stay in the middle. So now we've controlled more squares. He can't go to these squares and he can't stay on this one. So let's suppose he goes here, following his plan. And now we do this, which makes more sense than being here, because unless you have a good reason, you don't duplicate effort. So you don't need the king to guard this square because the rook already does. So now the king is forced out of the four center squares. So he moves toward the rook. We're not going to move the rook until we have to. So now he chases the rook. And now you want to never put your rook so close to the defending king that he can attack it and you cannot defend it with your king. So notice that there are several moves that are equally optimal. And if the king attacks it, now we would really like to defend it with our king normally. here, if you make this move, the king is forced to go closer to the edge or to this position where you can check him and force him closer to the edge. So suppose he does that, and now well, here we can cut off more, so now he's the king prevents him from moving to the right here, and the rook prevents him from moving up, so he is stuck in here, so not wanting to give the king more ground. Now here with the wiggle method you would do this, but this method works well because if the king goes to d1, then you just move the rook back along the file, and where's the black king forced to go? Let's say the black king moves to d1, and then you just move your rook back along the c file. Where would black have to go? He would have to go here, and then you go rook to c1, checkmate. So therefore, he tries to stay as far from the corner as he can. We don't want to just have to move the king, so we encroach on him. At that point, it's the same sort of a move you would make with the wiggle method. And again, he tries to stay away, but this works well because if he goes to c1, then you move your rook down along or up along the file, and the black king will then have to move to d1, and then the rook comes back to b1 for a checkmate. So therefore his only alternative, trying to stay away from the corner, is to go here. White goes here guarding the rook. Now the king is forced here, and then when we check him, he has one legal move, and now we simply make a tempo move, and he's forced here, and then we have a checkmate. So there's a longer video on how to do the checkmate with the king against the rook, but this is an essential skill for beginners, just like king and queen against the king. So those of you who can use the optimal method reliably, you should use that. If you find that difficult, you can just use the wiggle method, which should still produce a checkmate in less than 50 moves and avoid most of the danger of going past 50 moves. So in the next lesson, we're going to cover king and pawn against a king, which will include king and queen against a king. So be ready for it. Try to be the one who's a rook ahead, and remember to develop your pieces, and do take a look at this video more than once if you need to. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.